Good morning, Prism mates. Welcome to Taub Live. And as you know, we have always thought that Donald Trump, head of the Republican Party, was an odd choice for the GOP, who claimed to value families, who claimed to value marriage, who claimed to champion the lives of children. And what do we find out? You already know that Donald Trump has been married 3 times and had many affairs. That's not unlawful. It's just hypocritical. We also know that everyone he surrounds himself with seems to share the same contradictory values, right? We know this. And we also were told by this party that we weren't allowed to say Black Lives Matter because we were supposed to say all lives matter. Well, guess what we have found out? Not shocking at all. In our breaking news today, we have an outright demonstration of how the Republican Party and their mouthpieces on Fox News hate everyone but people they consider to be in their in group, whatever that in group is, which seems to be getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I got news for you, breaking news for you. In fact, that the Supreme Court slapped back Donald Trump and said, no, that father, that family man from Maryland who you had your goons arrest, deport, and thrown into an El Salvadoran gulag, that man who was supposed to be protected in the U.S. pending his immigration case, that man who is married to an American citizen who has 2 children. You need to, the Supreme Court said, do what needs to be done to try to bring him back. We'll get into that. But there is so much more, including how Jeanine Pirro actually hates orphans. So now, Donald Trump and MAGA are the Make Americans Ghouls Again party. And so you know where that brings us right now. Right now is to welcome to Prism Life.
Hello, Prism mates. It's the Taub show where welcome everyone. Let's learn.
Okay, guys, let's dive right in. Oh boy. Jeanine Pirro. She is someone who you probably have seen on Fox News for ages. What you might not remember is that I believe that she has her own sorry, sad past, and that her husband ran into some trouble, and his name was Albert Pirro. And my understanding is that he spent some time in prison, and in January of 2021, that Donald Trump, at the very last minute, after the very end of his first term, pardoned her ex-husband. Okay, so you would think she would show some grace toward other people who have had problems in their family. And you may say to yourself, well, what was this last minute pardon for? Was Jeanine Pirro's husband here with some immigration problems, trying to escape a country when he was a young child, where he had been tried to be recruited into gangs, and the only way he could survive was to leave? Oh no, that's not what happened to Al Pirro. Al Pirro was accused and convicted of tax evasion, right? He had served prison time for tax evasion. Let's remember that that his wife was a Westchester County district attorney at one time, and yes, and then this was back um, in in 2000 that he was finally had 2000 and I'm sorry, let me go. I'm saying this backwards. In 2021, Donald Trump overturned his conviction, but in 2000, his wife was actually in law enforcement, right? And he got this last minute pardon. It was a full pardon. This was her ex-husband, and she still, of course, was deeply grateful. They were both very loyal to Trump. So let's talk about Jeanine Pirro. Jeanine Pirro doesn't care about your family. Jeanine Pirro has the audacity to essentially lie to the American people by going on cable news and telling us that there are people cheating by taking Social Security, and she's trying to support the Doge lies, saying, "Oh my goodness, Social Security benefits." Making it seem like Social Security benefits are only for the elderly, when we all know, or should know. I shouldn't say we all know. If you have ever had a tragedy in your family, you know, and certainly the Fox News host would know this because she's speaking about it in front of millions of people. If there's a tragedy in your family, there's something called survivor benefits. So this can happen to a spouse. If one of the spouses has worked and paid into the Social Security system, if, let's say, your husband dies, you might get a temporary Social Security benefit, the survivor's benefit. The same thing is true for people who lose a parent or both parents. These people are small children. And this is important if you are now a single parent trying to raise your children, or if these children are now orphaned. What should we do as a society? And we decided as a society to have this benefit. Let's listen to this ghoul, Jeanine Pirro, now.
Found out that there are people who were between the ages of 1 and 4 are getting Social Security, that we've got something like $69 million of taxpayers who are dead.
Okay, but let
me just finish. But the problem is this.
Did you hear, Jessica? That's the benefit for children whose parents are dead. And she said, let me just finish. What absolutely awful, awful people. And I just want to be clear to you, it's still up on the website right now. It's still up. The Social Security Administration has still talked about survivor benefits. And it says on the website right now, survivor benefits provide monthly payments to eligible family members of people who worked and paid Social Security taxes before they died. And if you want to see who you're eligible, let's look at the children. Children of someone who died may be eligible if they're unmarried and are age 17 and younger, or if you're between 18 and 19 and you're in school K through 12 full time. So basically, the oldest you can be as a child is 19. Typically, it's 17 or younger. Also, any age, if you have a disability, if you had developed a disability when you're age 21 or younger. Okay, so this is the situation. This is the example. This is really important, and it's still available to people, and she should know better than that. This is an effort to demonize anyone who receives, in this instance, I won't call it a benefit. They're receiving essentially an insurance payment, right? If you bought homeowners insurance and there was a fire in your house and you had been paying premiums all those years, don't you expect coverage for your loss? And that is what Social Security was designed to do, right? It's a system designed to say, listen, you pay into this while you're working, while you are able-bodied, while you can, And then when you are older and it's time for your retirement, there is this safety net because not all of us can fully save for retirement, right? It also says, you know what? People like children and the vulnerable actually shouldn't have to and can't work. And if they lose a parent as a provider, whether that is of care in the home, or if it is the parent who provides, the actually puts, the, what do we say, put food on their family, that George Bush did, provided food on the table, right? So this is what it's supposed to do. And the problem, though, is that we keep changing. We keep changing the date for when you can receive your full Social Security benefits, right? When I was younger, it was a lower age. Now you can only receive your full benefits at age 70. Now, this is neither here nor there, the retirement age piece of it. The point here, though, is we have a dangerous situation where we are allowing and not calling people out on the fact that all lives matter was something they insisted, but they don't really mean it. And when we were saying things like Black Lives Matter, the point wasn't to suggest that no other lives did, but it was to remind people that Black lives matter too, that orphans' lives matter, that retired people's lives matter, that the disabled matter. But you can sort of see that these folks are outside the in group. The only people whose lives actually matter to the Trump regime and that are a reference point for them are their own personal families. That's why Howard Lutnick can use his mother-in-law, Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, who is also affiliated still with Cantor Fitzgerald, this multi-billionaire, uses his own mother-in-law as a reference. If my mother-in-law can handle not getting a Social Security check, then so can you, is his reference point. He knows better. He should know better, but he doesn't care to know better or to reference anything outside of his group. Now, let's talk about the breaking news. The U.S. Supreme Court last night did something I think remarkable for the court in that it issued a 9-0, a unanimous decision to say that it is time for Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. So it is time for Mr. Abrego Garcia, the man I mentioned from Maryland, the husband and the father who was wrongfully and mistakenly snatched off the streets. Essentially, he actually wasn't snatched off the streets. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He was going in to meet with his immigration contact to check in with him as his case continues. And they locked him up, put him on a plane, and sent him to El Salvador, claiming he was a gang member. There is no evidence of this whatsoever. The only allegations against him were made back in 2019 by some other person, and there was no substance to this to back it up. He was never actually arrested for that. And the Supreme Court held, this was yesterday, on April 10th, held that they needed to now fix this administrative error. Now, to be clear, this case came up from a federal judge who said, you need to bring him home no later than the night of April 7th. Now, you know that's already passed so clearly, right? That's almost, as of Monday, that will be 2 weeks ago. So on April 7th before midnight, well, that was a stay was put on that, an administrative stay by the Chief Justice, and now they have decided to review the case. And what they have decided is that it is time for the judge below to now reissue her order to say that they must treat Abrego Garcia with the legal rights he's entitled under the U.S. Constitution. And specifically, so this is a 9-justice majority, but also Sonia Sotomayor wrote a separate statement, just to be clear on this. And in this decision, the Supreme Court only quibbled with one thing from the judge below. The judge below, this was last Friday, the U.S. District Court, the federal judge in Maryland, had entered an order saying that just to be clear. So again, April 4th was when she entered the order. That was a Friday. And then on the Monday, she said, okay, now by Monday, you need to bring, I said 2 weeks, but it will be a week. And let's get these dates right. Last Friday, the judge entered an order directing the Trump administration to facilitate and effectuate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia by no later than Monday, the 7th, before midnight. That's what she said. Now, the Supreme Court, in looking at that, only agreed with part of that. So they essentially said, yes, we agree that it's okay for the judge now to reissue her order and say that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. But there's a little fly in this ointment. What they're talking about is what that actually means. In other words, they said the order properly requires the government to facilitate, and I'm reading the majority decision. This is 9-0 unanimous, that the order properly requires Donald Trump's regime to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador, in that Gulag prison. They didn't say Gulag prison, but they have to facilitate his release, and they have to ensure that his case is properly handled, as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. That's what the court said. The thing they're quibbling with is the intended scope of the word effectuate. The Supreme Court said it's unclear, and they're worried that the word effectuate may exceed what a federal court can do. So, okay. Facilitate is different than effectuate. They're concerned that effectuate is a demand that the government act in such a way that it means achieving the result. Facilitate maybe is work toward, but not guarantee the result that he's brought back. So this is of somewhat concern. But the good news is, and this is what I want to share with you, is that the judge wasted absolutely no time on this at all. And she immediately jumped on this and said, essentially, this is that they cannot waste any time. So immediately upon the Supreme Court saying, let this man go, let this father go, or essentially, yes, Trump, you have to facilitate his release from this torture prison in El Salvador and bringing him back. You have to facilitate that. So what ended up happening is the judge last night, the federal judge in Maryland, made it very clear. She referenced this case, and she said that you need to, and this is the deadline, that you need to, by this morning, we're talking about 9:30 this morning, they need to report to the court, right? They need to tell the judge by 9:30 today, that's in a half hour, where is Mr. Abrego Garcia, and what steps they have already taken and will be taken to facilitate his return. Okay, that's step one. This is the federal judge in Maryland reacting immediately to the Supreme Court from last night. In addition, by today at 1 p.m., there will be a status conference where the judge wants to hear directly from the parties, and she wants to know from their mouths, from the Trump administration, how it's going, right? She is checking in on them. Now, in addition, they expect, I believe, him to be, I don't know the actual date that she's insisting he be facilitated to be returned, but my memory of this is that it is very quickly, and I think they want him back immediately, maybe as soon as Monday, but that might just be what I'm hoping for. So the bottom line here, my friends, is the Trump administration doesn't actually care about families. And we are kind of between a rock and a hard place, because we're going to find out pretty soon today whether the Trump administration is going to try to directly defy the Supreme Court or just pretend that they cannot facilitate his return. Moreover, they may argue executive privilege that the process they're going to take will involve Donald Trump speaking with the president of El Salvador, and therefore none of those conversations will be able to be specifically discussed, or what he asked for. And so we are going to see whether this man will get justice, or whether, and this is the real test, because if they will not facilitate his return, then we absolutely know that anyone can be whisked away under false accusations. And let me just actually back up too, to be clear. The Supreme Court has separately made clear that in a different case, in the Boasberg case involving these prisoners in Texas who are worried that they are going to be put on a plane and also sent to this El Salvadoran prison. Now, let me just be clear. The Supreme Court has made clear that it defies the Constitution's due process to without any kind of notice or hearing, to snatch someone off the street and send them into a foreign country. However, what the Supreme Court has also made clear is that a case needs to be brought, a habeas corpus case, meaning it has to, don't worry about that, it has to be brought where the prisoners are. So those cases have now been brought in Texas, where prisoners are. And this is people who are in U.S. prisons in custody right now, or in ICE custody in the United States. So they're right now, just to be clear, on the one hand, the Supreme Court has made clear that it's not lawful to snatch someone off the street and send them to a foreign country without any due process. And they've also made clear that people who are in the United States right now can do something right now in court to ensure, if they're in custody, to deal with the custody in the United States. The missing piece here, though, is what if, as we have seen with Mr. Alberto, as we have seen now in the case of Mr. Armando Abrego Garcia, that what happens if they violate the law? You know, what happens if the Trump administration defies the law, does not provide notice in a hearing and due process protections, and makes a mistake, like they did in his case, says he's a gang member, and sends him off to a foreign prison? What we're learning is the government is required to facilitate that person's return, but not to effectuate it. Guys, if he does not bring this man home, this is true fascist Nazi Germany. This is a loophole you could drive not just a truck through, but you could fly a series of planes through that loophole. And my God, I hope none of our friends or families will be on that. So we will find out soon. Now, I think it's better, not that I speak, but that the wife of Mr. Armando Abrego Garcia actually speaks, And I want to tell you her name. Her name is, I know it's Jennifer, Jennifer Vasquez Sura. So I think you should hear from Jennifer Vasquez Sura about her husband. This was a press conference yesterday. Here we go.
It's been 28 days since I lost on my husband. Since his children hugged him, since his mother kissed him, since his brother has talked to him. Court ruled that indeed this should have never happened. The rule that my life partner Kilmar should have returned home 50 hours ago. But here I am again today, standing before you, pleading that you continue to uplift his story and remember his name, because the Trump administration and the Bukele administration continues to delay the reunification of my family.
And let's be clear what's going on here. When I was talking about Jeanine Pirro's husband, ex-husband Al, and I was saying what landed him in prison, and it was tax evasion. What got Jennifer Vasquez Sura's husband into prison in the first place? He was in 2019 rounded up with some other guys in Maryland, and one of the other guys rounded up by the police. And then they found out that let me just back up. He came to the US as a teenager from El Salvador, right? He is not part of a Trandagua, a Venezuelan drug gang. He came from El Salvador as a young teenager to escape recruitment into gangs. The gang members, according to what I have read, told his mother, if he doesn't sign up with the gang, he'll be killed. So he escaped to America. And that was when he was a teenager. And he lived here, he worked here. And in 2019, he was at that time, Jennifer Vasquez Sura was his girlfriend, not his wife yet. In 2019, he was taken into custody and he was accused by the police and put in prison. And then he got out through an immigration process. Let me just explain this. He was accused of being part of some other gang that Donald Trump hates. And he says he wasn't. There's no evidence he was in that gang other than the accusation by, and I think we talked about this before, by this other person who was rounded up about him participating something when he didn't even live in that particular state. So there was no real evidence on him, but he still had an immigration case then. And as part of that immigration case, the judge agreed not to send him back to El Salvador. Now, it was too late to seek asylum, because apparently you have to seek asylum within 1 year of your coming to the United States. But there was a real danger, the judge determined in 2019, that were he sent to El Salvador, he would be harmed because he refused to participate in this gang and so on. So he was allowed to stay. This is 2019. We're talking about 6 years ago. He was allowed to stay in the US, but he still has an immigration case. And he's supposed to regularly, I think it's every year, meet with his immigration officer. And it was when he went in this time, that a few weeks ago, that they grabbed him. And his wife just told you how many specific days, but they grabbed him and they put him on a plane and they sent him to El Salvador, the very place they were not supposed to send him. So this is what we are talking about here. And again, I'm eager to hear, to see the filings that will be filed this morning at 9:30 with the court, and to hear what happens at the status conference, if that indeed is open to the public or if we just find out. And I'm eager to see the efforts the Trump administration makes to actually facilitate his return. I won't hold my breath, but I will keep his family in my prayers and our nation in my prayers, that somehow someone inside the Trump administration does the right thing. Now, speaking of, we started out with Jeanine Pirro hates orphans, the Donald Trump administration, and also that is the mouthpiece for the Trump administration. So we've got the Trump administration wants to take money from orphans, right? Mocking orphans. We also have the Trump administration not having family values, but wanting to break up families and send someone who has lived the American dream, who has several children, a wife here in America, who is, by the way, an American citizen, wants to break that family up, violate the Constitution, and maybe never actually facilitate this man's return from this torture prison. Okay? Not very family values. Well, guess what I have for you? If you think that's bad, what about RFK Jr., our Secretary of Health and Human Services, the vaccine skeptic, who somehow believes he knows more than anybody else and will read the junk science reports correlating autism with vaccines and deciding that vaccines are bad, even for eradicating deadly diseases that took the lives of children until we essentially eliminated them from the U.S. Listen to what he says about measles. Remember, his kids are vaccinated, but let's hear what he thinks about our children.
That you do believe that the MMR vaccine is the most effective way to limit the spread. Do you believe that Daisy would have died or her cousin would have been sickened if they had had that MMR vaccine, which they did not have for religious exemption reasons?
Well, it's very hard to tell. Daisy, I've seen her medical reports. She had a lot of complications that could have killed her. Particularly, she had acute tonsillectomy. She had been hospitalized 3 times before. She also had acute mononucleosis that she could not shake. She was graft positive for bacteria in her blood system, which is a red flag. And her death was caused by pneumonia. So, her parents said that she was over measles 2 weeks before. So it's hard to tell. Measles often is accompanied by pulmonary and respiratory illnesses. But we need to do better at treating kids who have this disease and not just saying the only answer is vaccination. We also need to make sure that doctors know the appropriate treatment.
Oh, fuck you. Abso-fucking-lutely. You don't care about treating children. Whether doctors know the appropriate treatment? Fuck you, RFK Jr. This is the same administration that wants to cut Medicaid. I am screaming now. How the hell are people supposed to get treatment from doctors if they don't have medical insurance, if they can't afford to pay? And fuck you that you are playing a doctor on television. That you say, oh, yeah, measles can be accompanied by these other immune system problems that weaken them. Well, you know what? People who die of many diseases, the thing that causes their death is when their heart stops. So you can say that she died of these other things, but the bottom line is it's pretty flippin' clear that if she had not had measles, this wouldn't have happened. And I thought a stitch in time saves 9. I thought prevention was a better cost and time and health saver than intervention. And I could be enraged, but it's beyond that. This man is a quack and he's a danger. And this little girl, Daisy, whose funeral he attended, and I think it was West Texas, and this measles outbreak and children dying, this is outrageous. The fact that no one cares because this is the Trump regime and they're just going to let RFK do this, this is a scandal. Again, they hate orphans, they hate families, and they hate your children. I shouldn't say that. I'm sounding like them. It's not hate. Hate, I sound like Taylor Swift, is the opposite of love. It's indifference. They don't care about us. We have to care about us. We have to cut through the lies. Now, I want to have some positive stuff, but I'm on a roll now. I want to give you one more set of lies. And I've decided that Carolyn Leavitt, I don't know if anyone's come up with this, but given how close this regime is to the Nazi regime in Germany, and I say this because you might remember that Hitler went after disabled people first. There is this idea they don't want anyone. I mean, beyond being about white Christian supremacy that Hitler was about, he was also about the Übermensch, the Superman, and they wanted everyone to be an image of health and an image of the ability to work for the German state. Why? Because they don't want, the idea is anyone who needs anything, they wanted to ignore. They wanted to kill and eradicate. And that is what they started doing well before they actually put Jewish people in concentration camps. So this gets me to, I can't believe I have a smile on my face, but truth makes me smile. This gets me to Carolyn Leavitt, White House press secretary. And has anyone called her Ava Braun Barbie? For the youngsters in this crowd, Ava Braun was Hitler's mistress. I'm not suggesting, it's unfair to compare Carolyn Leavitt to Ava Braun because she is not Donald Trump's mistress. But to compare her to a Nazi supporter, I'm cool with that. Here we go. Listen to her.
Can you shed some light on this? Because it was a story that we all covered, that he was the East Coast leader of MS-13. So what was the evidence that supported that proclamation by the Department of Justice and the FBI?
Here at the White House, we applaud the Attorney General Pam Bondi, our FBI Director Kash Patel, for working hand in hand with local law enforcement on the ground in the Commonwealth of Virginia to detain and arrest this MS-13 ringleader. There was sufficient evidence to do so, and now the case is in the hands of the Department of Homeland Security, who will be deporting this individual from our country. These agencies are working together in a collaborative way to follow President Trump's directive to eradicate MS-13 and foreign terrorists from United States soil. So this is an individual who was detained and arrested because of the president's policies, and he will no longer be residing in the United States of America. And our
I'm just trying to get some clarity on it, Caroline, because, if indeed he is what we were told he is, the East Coast leader of MS-13, wouldn't it make sense to prosecute him for crimes related to that? I know he was held on a gun charge, but to make sure that any victims of MS-13 through his leadership get their day in court here in the United States, and then send him to an El Salvadoran prison if he is deported and found guilty on those crimes.
Well, again, this administration is doing things differently, Martha, and this president has made a directive to his agencies, particularly the Department of Homeland Security, to remove foreign terrorists from America's homeland.
Doing things differently, Ava Braun Barbie. This isn't how we do things. It's not how the Supreme Court said we should be doing things. Look, if this dude is the head of a gang, charge him with that. Charge him with the gang violence. There are federal statutes. You could use RICO. You could use the actual underlying crimes in which he's been engaged in. I got a bunch of statutes, Caroline. Give me a call. I'm sure your DOJ, your Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is aware of the federal statutes you could use against this guy. There's a lot of them. Buddy, you got some probable cause for an arrest? That's great. You want to arraign him like you're required to and tell him the charges against him? Cool. You want to have a bail hearing and say and argue before the judge that he should not be let out because he is a flight risk or a danger to the community? Wow. You can fucking do that. We have amazing tools, Barbie. So doing it a different way is not the fucking way I want you to do it. This man could be off the streets if these are legit charges. So why aren't we doing it that way? Let's continue.
And to protect American citizens. And we have an incredible diplomatic relationship with the president of El Salvador and his government, who have been detaining these MS-13.
Oh, an amazing diplomatic relationship with the head of the El Salvadoran government. This is great news because they're the same people. It's the same guy the president of El Salvador, who has Jennifer Sora's husband locked up, right? Mr. Abrego Garcia. So if you've got a fucking great relationship, facilitate the hell out of that. Okay, let's continue.
Ringleaders and violent gang members in their prisons, and American taxpayers don't have to foot the bill for that cost. And so again, the bottom line
the
here,
Supreme Court said that the Alien Act could be used to remove people, but they had to reach due process first. I'm only pressing on this because it was a huge story.
Oh, yeah. Remember, I just mentioned that the Supreme Court did say, in the case brought by the guys from Texas, who are afraid they're going to be thrown on those planes as well, that the Alien Enemies Act, where Donald Trump is claiming we're at, some kind of war with Venezuela or whatever, he's invoking this Alien Enemies Act, but to put people on planes and send them out of the country. And what the Supreme Court literally said, and we have this Fox News host, Martha McCullens, telling Ava Braun Barbie that, yeah, the Supreme Court said you still have to engage in due process to figure out whether the people you are claiming are subject to the Alien Enemies Act actually are. When is that going to happen, bitch? I'm sorry, I shouldn't use those words, but, look at this. I mean, it's kind of funny, right? 3 blonde ladies sitting here. One of these 3 is not like the other, and that is Carolyn Leavitt, who just thinks she can sit there and spout this nonsense, this fascist, anti-American nonsense, and think that me and Martha are going to put up with her shit. Let's keep going.
And we covered it. Obviously, it would feel like that person could lead to a lot of other evidence. The DOJ would be pressing to see this in court so that other people could be exposed. And suddenly none of that's happening. So can you explain why the change of course in this particular case?
again, what I can tell you is that the president gave a directive to eradicate MS-13 ringleaders and gang members from our nation's communities. That is what's happening here. And to anyone who believes that these individuals...
Okay. I've heard enough of her nonsense. I've heard enough. So you kind of see what's going on here. A little pushback from Fox News. Martha McCullen is not the same as Jeanine Pirro, but, you know, it's a start. Now, let me give you some good news before we get to crazy town. I want to cleanse my brain of Ava Braun Barbie, so I think the best woman to help me with that is Congresswoman Jeanine Crockett from Texas. Let's hear something good from Texas on Chris Hayes last night. Here we go.
What this tells us, though, is that their propaganda is working, right? And that is what's so dangerous. This administration has someone that is heading up DHS that is going out there cosplaying with guns that it's clear she don't even know how to operate the guns. And, you know, she's taking these photos, you know, with people and they're telling them, yeah, they're Venezuelan gang members, right? And so they are telling people, listen, we're getting rid of the bad people, right? And we don't have enough stories because obviously they decided they were going to get rid of due process to know whether or not you really are going and getting the bad guys. There's somebody straight out of Dallas, Texas, who literally was snatched up and sent off to this same place because he had an autism tattoo, you know, and so they don't know the real stories. They only know what they're presented with. And we know that for whatever reason, when Trump and his cronies present lies, the American people fall in love. But the reality of this administration is a whole other story.
I love her. She is through and through truly who she is right there. And she is speaking truth to power. And she has already been threatened by Pam Bondi when she's critical of Trump. But that will not silence Jeanine Crockett. And I wish there were more members of Congress who had the courage to speak out. Many have the ability to do so without jeopardizing their positions. And they should. And note that she's talking about a different person there. When she talked about someone with an autism tattoo who was snatched up, she's referring to a different father. This is the man who had an autism tattoo supporting children with autism on his body, and his arm, his leg, because of his own child with autism. So again, they don't actually care about families. Now, I got someone else to share with you here. We have Congressman Padilla pointing out another piece of the hypocrisy of the Trump regime and the Republican Party. And this relates to something that I'm sorry to tell you, some Democrats voted for in the Congress. This is something you've heard of called the SAVE Act, SAVE. And this is a terrible piece of legislation. And it basically passed yesterday. It's a bill that could, according to Mark Elias in his Democracy Docket, disenfranchise millions of Americans. SAVE is an acronym that stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility. It passed 220 to 208, and we had 4 Democrats who supported the bill. All of the Republicans, there was no Republican opposition. I think you need to know who, if you have a Republican member of Congress, you need to call them. And I think you also need to know who the 4 Democrats were who supported this bill. Jared Golden of Maine, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez of Washington State, Henry Cuellar of Texas, and Ed Case of Hawaii. And the problem with the SAVE Act, and we're going to hear in a moment a little bit more about the hypocrisy here. The problem with the SAVE Act is it would make it difficult for people who are already voters, regardless of their party, to vote. This is because we're talking about, Jamie Raskin thinks it's tens of millions of voters. And part of this, they're claiming, is to make sure non-citizens don't vote. Well, non-citizens are not allowed to vote, but they want to create a system that would require voters to prove that they are here in the U.S. lawfully. So you would need documentation that, for example, a passport or a birth certificate or naturalization papers. Well, one of the biggest problems with the SAVE Act is many women, when they get married, informally begin to take their husband's name. And for example, my mother did that. My mother took my mother's maiden name was Goodman. My father's name was Taub. And when she got married, she just went by Shelley Goodman Taub. I mean, she was born, I got to tell you, she'd kill me if I told you this, but her mother, I love my grandma Edith, but her mother gave her a very unusual name. It was Rochelle Hilda Goodman. When I found out my mother's name was Hilda, I couldn't believe it because I think there was a witch named Hilda. But the point is, my mother didn't love the name Rochelle Hilda. So the minute my mother had an opportunity, she actually changed her name. Yes, my mother's dead name was Rochelle Hilda. No one called her Rochelle. Her mother did, and it infuriated her. My mother changed her name to Shelley. She went by Shelley, Shelley, like the poet Shelley. And that's what she went by. So when she got married, first of all, she dropped the Hilda like a hot potato and went with Shelley because she hated Rochelle. Rochelle's a beautiful name. It just didn't suit my mom. So when she got married, she started going by the name Shelley Goodman Taub, SGT. She even ran for local office and then was in the state legislature in Michigan, yes, in the House of Representatives here, with the name Shelley Goodman Taub. But at some point, sometime after 9/11, when things were getting more difficult, and I can't remember what it was, my mother had to officially go do a name change to Shelley Goodman Taub because her name on her Social Security card did not line up with the name she was actually using to do all kinds of things. This was not an easy task. And I swear to you, the fact that she did this is still complicated because not every bank or every place, recognizes the name change. Anyway, we could go on about that. So what is this about? The SAVE Act would complicate things because if you get married and you change your name, a lot of states allow you a free, you can file a free name change with the state, right? With the probate court or whatever, family and probate court, depending on how your jurisdiction works. But that's a process. And not all places, maybe it's lawful to do. Not all places, maybe it's free. Also, people don't love going to courts without lawyers. There's a name change notice sometimes. You can get waived. It's not easy to do that, right? And then even after you change your name, then you've got to contact the Social Security Administration and go in to visit them in person to get a new Social Security card. My friends, this is a process. And it requires time, it requires transportation, it requires access to a computer to sign up for these. It requires a whole bunch of stuff that creates friction. And if you've already been a voter, it's not great. And so this is what just passed in the House. Now, it's disturbing. And now referring back to Mark Elias and Democracy Docket, he says, the law would disproportionately affect voters of color. Millions of people who have taken their spouse's last name, which is almost 70 million married women, would be affected by this. Now, you may say to yourself, oh, so what? Probably the more conservative women are going to be the ones who took their husband's names. Well, first of all, that might have been historical. It's not true today. And secondly, so what? Everybody should have the right to vote. And creating a problem, interfering with women's ability to vote, we fought too hard for our right. So this is what, there was no Republican dissent. The Republicans own this bill, but those 4 Democratic members of Congress should be hearing for us. And as I said, if you're from their districts, I didn't say this, but if you are, give them a piece of your mind. Now, I want to get to the thing I was going to show you, the clip from Representative Padilla talking about this, because remember, this is a piece of federal legislation that's in the works that tells the states how to run their election. This is from the same party who is all states' rights. We cannot, this is the whole party who encouraged the Supreme Court to gut the Federal Voting Rights Act, to leave it to the states. Let the states intimidate Black voters. Let the states shut down voting areas for voting. So you have to wait in line in areas where there are more non-Republicans voting. I mean, this is what they wanted before. Let the states run their elections. But when it comes to disenfranchising women and making it harder to vote, they're fine with the feds doing that. So let me get this right. Allowing people to vote, which is a fundamental constitutional right, they don't want the feds helping with that. But if it means suppressing the right to vote, yay, yay, feds. Let me play this.
Current laws and protections are working. What would the SAVE Act do? It would make it harder for members of the military, for example, when they're deployed to a different base and maybe have to re-register, and it's not so easy, from not maybe being able to vote in the next election. Or a woman who's married and changed her last name, and all of a sudden her ID doesn't match her birth certificate. This is voter suppression, and it's unnecessary. The last big piece of hypocrisy here, Jose, is when Democrats have proposals on how we strengthen our democracy and voting rights, the Republicans are so quick to say, no, states run elections. The federal government should not dictate how states do it. But when it's Donald Trump who has these horrible ideas, they're silent and want to advance it. Even Mitch McConnell knows better and has spoken publicly against both the executive order that Donald Trump is trying to do and the SAVE Act, which includes the same provisions.
Okay. Now, there are people in the chat saying things. What about hyphenating your name? Again, the problem is if your documents are inconsistent. If you have, I know that people's driver's licenses are changing if you want to do air travel, but like if you have documents that have your hyphenated name and that's different from your birth certificate, which then is different from your Social Security card because people are now issued them on birth, you're going to have problems under this statute, and they don't care. They don't care. And so now, my friends, it is time for Crazy Town. Here we go. I love this part of the show. You know that. Okay. Crazy Town is Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro, as you may know, he is an American economist. He is giving Donald Trump advice on trade. He is for everything Donald Trump does And then when Donald Trump reverses course, he's for that and he pretends it's all some seamless strategy. You may also remember that he is someone who received a pardon. Now, he was pardoned because, as you remember, he had been convicted of contempt of Congress because he refused to provide his records in testimony when the House Select Committee asked him to provide them. Now, this was in connection with the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. So, yes, he was convicted, and naturally speaking, because this is Donald Trump pardoned him. Now, the other thing you should know about Peter Navarro, even though that the thing you should know about Peter Navarro is that he is a highly educated economist. I mean, that may shock you because he seems kind of crazy. He is. It's actually bizarre. When you look at his education, he got a PhD from Harvard. And it is a little bit astonishing that we now find out that just like Donald Trump, he makes up sock puppet people. These people are his sock puppets. So Donald Trump had John Barron, and Peter Navarro had this guy called Ron Varra, Ronvara, which is actually some kind of anagram out of the name Navarro. And he wrote these books saying that he spoke to an economist called Ron Varro, and this is what he told him. This is pretty cheesy and unethical. This is who this man is. Now, Peter Navarro appeared on CNN, and I want to show you two clips. Here we go.
CNBC is going to sue CNN for intruding on their financial analysis and all of that. And what I just heard in terms of the market analysis, that to me is pure spin. You had the highest rise in stock market history yesterday. Of course, there's going to be a little pullback. The question is, what spin are you going to put on it back? It's just a normal.
What the fuck? Casey Hunt is looking at him, and it doesn't make sense, right? Remember how the market surged 2 days ago when Donald Trump, that was on, it's hard to remember now, that was on Wednesday. It surged after he announced that he was dropping the tariffs. And then yesterday it kind of declined again. And Peter Navarro beginning this, it's crazy town, saying that CNBC was going to sue CNN because of their interpretation of what was going on in the markets. It gets even crazier here. Let's listen. I'm going to play a little more crazy town music for this next clip. Okay, guys. He is now begging Casey Hunt to show him some respect.
Provide him the appropriate set of advice. Every one of us on the team has a different skill set that combines to the collective wisdom of the group, and the boss makes the decision. And look, Casey, please, would you give us some kudos here for what happened? We're on a path now. For over 90 days. We're going to have every country come in who's admitted they cheated us, given us hundreds of billions of dollars back for the American people, and bring in investment here.
So we can
that's
put
what
up on
happened.
the
I don't
screen
know how you
long
spin it
some of this
any
takes,
other
right?
way.
So we've got.
I don't know how you'd spin it any other way. How about not spinning it? How about ending your flipping lies, Mr. Navarro? These countries where there's a trade deficit, it's not cheating. That's like saying that's like saying that Stop and Shop or Whole Foods is cheating me. I mean, maybe Whole Foods is cheating me because they don't buy anything from me. How about the nail salon? Are they cheating me because they provide me with manicures, but they never buy legal services from me? I mean, the idea that if you have a trade deficit with another country, that is cheating is moronic. It isn't founded in economics. And if he wrote that on if he said that at his dissertation defense, he would not have gotten his PhD granted from Harvard. But money talks, and so does a pardon. And that's why this guy is full of you know what. Now, on that note, I think it's time to say have an amazing weekend. For those of you who observe Passover, have a beautiful Seder tomorrow. I want to see your matzo ball soup photos. I'll try to provide them myself. Thank you for sticking with me a few minutes after the hour. Have a great weekend, and we are going to play the show out with Jason Smith's beautiful music.
Hello, prison mates. It's the Jen Taub Show. Well, welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today.